To my dearest friends, I am honored to welcome you back once more for today's special investigation into one of the most unique and enigmatic of Tyranid Hive fleets, which has thus far cursed the vast expanse of our galaxy. Most of us will already be well familiar with the three great fleets of Behemoth, Kraken, and Leviathan, which sparked the apocalyptic conflicts of the Tyrannic Wars, and which may very well prove to be the ultimate undoing to the Imperium of Man. But as more time has passed, the Tyranids have very clearly evolved and adapted themselves to our stars, resulting in the formation of many more Hive fleets, which have specialized themselves to a particular role. We previously looked over the burrowing forces of Jormungandr, of the demon-hunting bioforms of Kronos, and even of the scavenging vultures found in the Hydra. But these were all fairly straightforward to understand, yet today's fleet is something of an enigma. The Tyranids in question hail from the ancient hive known as Tiamet, and thus far, their mere existence has remained as a bewildering outlier, with their behaviors and strategies being truly uncharacteristic from the rest of their species. Having been first detected within our galaxy at some point during the 35th millennium, they stand as proof that the Tyranids were present long before the invasion of Behemoth during the First Tyrannic War. Further, it is speculated that all gene stealers within the galaxy will trace their lineage to the fleet of Tiamet, a fact which is difficult but not impossible to prove. Yet, rather strangely, they do not mimic the behaviors of other hives. Instead of reaching out to claim and ravage as many worlds as possible, absorbing their biomass to grow ever more bloated, they seem to be content to simply remain within their core territory of the Tiamet system. But they are in no state of hibernation, and instead they appear to be erecting a vast, unfathomable structure, which, when complete, could spell out the ultimate doom of all who call the stars as their home. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, and so I do believe that it is now time for us to begin. We will be exploring every aspect of these mysterious Tyranids, ranging from their history through to their unique bioforms and of the hypothetical purpose behind these horrific creatures. In any case, we are to now travel far into the eastern fringe, just beyond the borders of imperial rule, where we will discover the fortified hives of Tiamet. To begin with, we should first understand that this hive fleet was the first to ever be encountered, predating the forces of Behemoth by almost 6 millennia. In an isolated region of our galaxy, cast out into the distant wilderness, we will find the twin binary stars which sit at the heart of the Tiamet system. Being so far from Terra, it had not been reached during the Great Crusade, and so it simply remained in that abyssal dark of unknowing, cultivating a secret something which would undoubtedly horrify any who discovered it. Yet it was during the years of the 35th millennium when a Mechanicus exploratory fleet ventured out into the void, hoping to uncover a long-forgotten relic from humanity's most distant colonies. Their initial scans had revealed 7 large life-supporting worlds accompanied by a litany of smaller planetoids, and yet as they came closer, it soon became clear that each and every planet was utterly inhospitable to mankind. These were death worlds, but their classification was not based upon the atmospheres or landscapes, and instead it was because of the formidable and hostile wildlife who stalked the darkest corners as an inevitable alien plague. The Mechanicus did not yet know it, but they had just made mankind's first contact with the Tyranid menace. From orbit, they initially noted a curious sense of intelligence between the beasts, with their movements, and strategies, suggesting that perhaps they were hunting together in great packs. All attempts at recovering a specimen ended with failure, as the aliens would simply emerge en masse to swarm the technophants before dragging their shattered corpses deeper into the nightmarish tangle. Abandoning their mission, the priests gathered what data they could, and from their initial study determined that the life forms upon these worlds had all evolved from a common ancestry, yet had wildly diverged, each adapting to a different environmental or indeterminable niche. Unfortunately for the explorers, they realized far too late that they had unknowingly contaminated their ship with smaller creatures, which were now running rampant throughout the craft. The priests then opted to quarantine themselves whilst transmitting their discoveries back to their forge world. Yet not even a week could pass before they were all killed by the shipborne horrors, leaving their craft as a ghost ship. The Mechanicus and Imperium would go on to send a small fleet to enact a purgation mission throughout the Tiamet system, but their bombardments were remarkably ineffective against the well-armored aliens below. Thus, the Lords decreed that this system was to be abandoned, and that the subsector would be declared as a wilderness zone, as it was simply too great a challenge to dislodge the hostile creatures from their fertile homes. Being now left to their own devices, the Tyranids of Tiamet were granted with the opportunity to grow and spread further through their own system, leaving us now with one of the most interesting of fleets known throughout their species. The forces of Tiamet, for the longest time, were never observed to venture out from their home in the great bioships of their kind, which brings us to an important point on their origins. If these are indeed the first Tyranids to ever land within our galaxy, it is very unlikely that they sailed all this way aboard their ships, and rather, most leading theorists favor the panspermia hypothesis. This reads that the Tyranids would likely release vast clouds of their own DNA as tiny fragments to be carried by the solar winds, until they drift out through the intergalactic wilderness and arrive within a new galaxy. From here, they would land upon fertile worlds and rapidly evolve to produce Tyranid organisms who would proliferate and spread across the planet. As another interesting point, it is believed that the gene stealers from the moon of Imgal can trace their origin to the creatures of Tiamet. They would have infiltrated the various exploratory vessels which sought to investigate the alien worlds, being destined to land first upon Imgal and then later to spread out through the stars as the malignant horrors which we now know and hate. This would then mean that every gene stealer and devout cult within the galaxy will hold a distant relation to the Tyranids of Tiamet, which may further explain some of the curious behaviors in these bioforms. The gene stealers only loosely fall into the phylogenetic tree of the Tyranid species, and in fact, they tend to act rather strangely when compared to the hordes of warriors and gaunts. They will be seeded onto a world to sow panic and chaos, but once a biofleet arrives to consume the planet, the gene stealers will often flee, seeking to preserve their own lives rather than being consumed by the Hive. Another explanation for this behavior, however, is that it is extremely effective in allowing the creatures to scatter out from a doomed world, from where they will be poised to descend upon new planets and begin the cycle of death once more. The gene stealers, who are now native to the moons of Imgal, are curious even by gene stealer standards, with their strange hunched forms and feeder tendrils making them appear far more disgustingly alien than of their cousin creatures. If these beasts do indeed hail from Tiamet, then we could presume that they hold a more primitive form of the Tyranid DNA, and that the Imgal gene stealers could harbor a purer strain of the primordial genetic material which drifted out through the cosmic void. But in any case, returning to the Tiamet system, we will note that, aside from being utterly overrun by the Tyranids, that the worlds appear almost peaceful. The beasts do not typically venture away from their worlds, choosing instead to simply scuttle about through the varying environments, acting more as stray animals than of galaxy-consuming horrors. In fact, they appear to have struck an ecological balance with the fellow creatures of their worlds. Since Tiamet is not on a warpath, it does not have access to any vast stores of biomass, but instead they will selectively consume the alien flora and fauna upon their own worlds, maintaining a state of self-sufficiency, a point which I must stress is highly unusual for their kind. It is currently unknown if there is any native life left upon their worlds, but it is more likely that each and every creature now harbors a good deal of Tyranid DNA. This could suggest that they are then compelled by the hive mind to give themselves up to be feasted upon. But this will have to remain as mere speculation. The actual bioforms of Tiamet are quite unique when compared to those of the other hives. The Tyranids have very clearly followed an evolutionary path which favored defensiveness, as even the smallest of gaunt will be coated in thick plates of chitin, keeping them surprisingly safe against even bolter or plasma fire. This material has since been recovered and studied, revealing that it is in fact a unique material to the forces of Tiamet, being far harder than of any previously encountered fleet. Their forces, when provoked, will huddle together and charge as a great armored clutch, slowly pushing their way forward as a living shield, moving with a terrifying sense of inevitability. Within the Tiamet system, there is a world known as Zeophoria, which has become one of the greatest mysteries to the agents of the Ordo Biologies. In recent years, this planet has started to give off immense psychic emanations, so large that they have been detected on the other side of the galaxy. No one is quite sure as to the origin of these pulses, nor of their purpose, but in our next chapter we will explore the topic in far more detail. Returning to the forces of Tiamet, I have mentioned that they rarely venture out of their home system, and whilst this is true, in more recent years they have seemingly become more and more agitated. Thus, they will now send out feeder vessels to capture any ships which venture too close to their borders, latching on before dragging them back towards Tiamet, where they will be devoured and consumed for the Hive. Also, with the turning of the 42nd millennium and with the opening of the Great Rift, the forces of Tiamet have now been encountered for the first time in history as having ventured out to claim new worlds and systems. Their tendrils, once coiled, are now slowly unfurling, stretching out through the stars to ensnare any who find themselves in the unfortunate path of the relentless Tyranids. Now that we understand a little more about their kind, let us remember that each and every hive fleet has been adapted and specialized towards a specific purpose, with Tiamet being of no exception. It is far less clear on what their goals are, and until the psychic phenomena upon Zeophoria is uncovered, we will likely be left in the dark. But until then, we can make some educated guesses into how they benefit the wider Tyranid species. Firstly, I will reiterate the fact that, until very recently, that they were categorically the most defensive hive fleet which we have thus far encountered. Since their first discovery, they have remained almost entirely isolated within their home system, And we have no idea when they first arrived there, so truly they could have spent untold millennia there, simply cultivating their own hive. This does beg the question, however, of why are they so defensive? One of the leading theories which answers this question is that Tiamet was sent as one of the first vanguard fleets to scout out the galaxy and to determine if it was ripe for harvesting. Being sent as fragments of DNA, however, could suggest that the Tyranid species will occasionally send out clouds of genetic material to seed any galaxy they possibly can, which would then mean that Tiamet appeared in the Milky Way, entirely by chance. The reason I say this is that the larger fleets, which arrived en masse to invade the galaxy, are thought to have been actively drawn towards our stars, partly by the light of the Astronomicon and partly by the enigmatic Pharos device. This was an ancient Necron artifact activated during the Horus Heresy, which emitted a flash of power out across the galaxy and far beyond, where it was possibly detected by the slumbering hive fleets of the Tyranids. The presence of the beaming psychic light of the Astronomicon, combined with this pulse, would have attracted the Tyranids as moths to a flame, clearly indicating that there is indeed life around these stars. As a rather dark note, this would suggest that the intergalactic void is filled with hibernating fleets simply waiting for a signal to be stirred back into life. But if neither of these beacons existed, then the galaxy would have appeared cold and lifeless, sparing those within. Yet this is where the forces of Tiamet come in. I believe that the Tyranids, scattered out in their manner, were destined to scout out whatever galaxy they land within, and if they detect an ample degree of life, that they were to then produce their own beacon to actively draw the slumbering fleets towards them. This could potentially explain the purpose behind the strange psychic emanations located upon Zeophoria. Perhaps the Tyranids are converting the entire world into an instrument, which will project a psionic wave out into the intergalactic void, waking the slumbering fleets and drawing them towards our fertile stars. This theory would also explain as to why the forces of Tiamet are so isolated and defensive. They would not wish to spread out through the galaxy, as it would draw attention to their growing beacon, which, if destroyed in its infancy, would put a stop to their entire plan. But if an invasion of their system did occur, then the bioforms have been so adapted towards defending themselves that they would likely be able to fend off the attackers, safeguarding their precious beacon. This is exactly what occurred after their first discovery by the Mechanicus, where the worlds were bombed from orbit and eventually abandoned once the priests realized that their efforts were futile in exterminating the creatures. At this point, they also wouldn't have realized that a beacon was being constructed, and so the potentially galaxy-devouring threat of Tiamet was able to persist and lurk out in the dark. The fact that the hypothetical Tiamet beacon upon Zeophoria was being produced at the same time as the Astronomicon and Pharos device seems to be a coincidence more than anything else. But there is a second theory behind the purpose of this world. Before we explore it, we need to remember that all gene stealers are thought to have a common ancestor from the Hive of Tiamet, and thus all of the gene stealer cults would also share an unknown link to this mysterious fleet. Amazingly, it has been noted that cultists from around the galaxy will set out on pilgrimages towards the Tiamet system, and that they will be able to safely land upon the Tyranid worlds without being immediately devoured by the endless swarms. This is perhaps the only place in the galaxy where a cultist may freely walk alongside a non-gene stealer bioform, and yet perhaps the forces of Tiamet hold a hitherto undiscovered connection to those enthralled by the Broodlord's song. But those who land upon Zeophoria will never leave to rejoin their old cult. Rather, they will join in the so-called Choir of the Void, which solely exists to draw unsuspecting ships into the Tiamet system, to then be devoured by the starving Hive. Trading vessels and civilian crafts will often be targeted, with those aboard being promised of a fertile world to colonize, yet when they arrive, all they will find is death. Nevertheless, returning to the theory on the beacon, it was once noted that a chaotic cult was once drawn to this world, and yet when they landed, they found that their minds were suddenly freed from the shackles of the warp, though it was quickly replaced by those of the Tyranids. Thus we could possibly speculate that the psychic emanations from the mysterious constructs upon Zeophoria may be able to nullify the corrupting effects of the warp. This is quite a bold theory, and it might not be true. However, during the 41st millennium, traces of Hive fleet Tiamet were discovered in Segmentum Obscurus, in the sectors which surround the Eye of Terror. Thus, perhaps the Tyranids of this hive will one day seek to replicate their nullifying beacons in the areas which surround that infernal warp storm, possibly closing the rift once and for all. In some ways, this makes sense, as the Tyranids cannot gain any biomass from claiming the demonic worlds which have fallen to the infernal powers. However, until we learn more about the world of Zeophoria, this theory might simply be too far-fetched to truly believe. There are other theories in regards to the great structural capillaries upon Zeophoria, which suggest that they simply exist as specialized defensive structures, intended on deterring the psychically sensitive species of the galaxy from delving into their worlds. Some scholars believe that the Tiamet system is used by the Tyranids as something of a testing ground, where they produce experimental strains of their bioforms before releasing them across the planets and learning of their effectiveness in battle. This would explain as to why the various worlds of the system are so diverse in their environments, as the new bioforms could then be adapted and subdivided to produce strains which are most effective in lush jungles or for traversing an arid mountaintop. This theory is further supported by the idea that the gene-stealer bioform was first introduced to the galaxy by Tiamet. Perhaps in time new, ever more horrifying beasts will be formulated within the isolated system, but we will simply have to wait and see if this comes to pass. Regardless, if this is true, then it would be quite a devastating blow for the Tyranids to lose these worlds. Yet, with the psychically repulsive emissions from Zeophoria, none will ever wish to send an invasion force to land upon their worlds, thus keeping the Tyranid testing grounds safe and secure. Many of you will at this point be wondering as to why the Imperium does not just condemn these worlds to death via an exterminatus and be freed from the mysterious threats which lurk within. The answer to this is threefold. Firstly, the Tiamet system lies on the far side of the eastern fringe, an area where the light of the Astronomicon does not reach. Thus, the Imperial ships will find it incredibly difficult to navigate this region of space, and they would rather not risk becoming lost out in the wilderness. Hypothetically, the beacon on Zeophoria, if left to grow, could one day be detected by the navigators, who could then use it in a similar manner to the Astronomicon to guide their distant journeys, but there is no way of knowing if this will come to pass. The second reason, however, is that the Imperials and other alien empires of the galaxy have no real idea as to what exists within the Tiamet system. From the outside, the Tyranids appear almost entirely dormant, and so, at the current moment, they are not posing a great enough threat to incite the deployment of an entire strike force. Further to this point, whilst they know that the Tyranids are present, they truly do not understand the enigmatic structure being constructed upon Xyophoria. If they knew that a mysterious psychic beacon was slowly engulfing the world, then perhaps they would take the matter more seriously. But until that day, Tiamet will silently remain. The third and final reason is that the Tyranids of Hive Fleet Kraken recently advanced through the eastern fringe, and have since made this area particularly hostile to all forms of life. Thus, the Imperials are in a rather awkward position, where they are ignorant to the true threat of Tiamet and cannot even chart a safe course through the lightless abyss, which is now utterly teeming with the bioships of the Kraken. But in any case, until we uncover the definitive answers to the function and purpose of the Xyophoria beacon, then my thoughts will simply remain as scattered theories. Still, given how fascinating and far-reaching this mystery is, I would love to hear of your own thoughts on what purpose the Hive fleet of Tiamet truly serves. Though isolated from much of the galaxy, Hive fleet Tiamet has still been involved in a number of notable encounters, almost always headed by groups who were ignorant to the true threat which lurked within this system. We already covered its first discovery by the Mechanicus during the 35th millennium, which resulted in naught but death for the Technophants, and of the potential propagation of the gene-stealer bioforms who had infiltrated their way aboard the now drifting ghost ship. This ship eventually crashed upon the moons of Imgal, permitting the alien horrors to slither out of the wreckage. Yet they found no traces of intelligent life upon the barren rocks. Instead, they were forced to infect and feed off of a species of giant leeches, and it was from their DNA that the gene stealers gained their iconic and downright nightmarish feeder tendrils. They have been known to use these to latch onto the back of an enemy's head before biting down and sucking out the victim's succulent brain, replete with their memories and knowledge of the surrounding areas. The gene stealers of Imgal possess a slightly aberrant form of DNA, making them far more susceptible to developing maladaptive mutations. In any case, with the gene stealers now spread out as one of the offspring to Tiamet, let us return to their home system and learn of the time when an Eldari party descended through the jungle canopies of Xyophoria and of the horrors they uncovered. We are not entirely sure as to why they chose this world, but given that the group consisted of rangers from Ayandan, we could speculate that they were hoping to find a more efficient method for exterminating the forces of Hive Fleet Kraken, which were rapidly approaching their craft world. Making planetfall, they quickly discovered that beneath the trees was a continent-spanning mass of pulsating flesh, coated in thick layers of dense carapace, from which conical projections would jut out, towering high up through the canopies above. As it throbbed and shuddered, great waves of psychic energy would rush out, being so potent that the rangers could do little but fall to their knees, their minds breaking and shattering beneath the impossible weight of the shadow in the warp. Forced to flee, the Eldari barely escaped with their lives, yet all they could do was to report the nightmarish horrors to their kind, and to pray that they would never have to relive that hellish experience again. I previously mentioned a chaos cult which fell to the song of Tiamet, and they were to be found upon the distant world of Heinrich's March. The heretics had amassed a legion of slaves who were to be worked to the death as they constructed a great ziggurat in praise of the victories, and pride they felt towards their worship of the darker powers. But from the depths of the slave camps arose a new prophet, preaching of a four-armed alien god who would come from beyond the stars to shepherd the persecuted masses towards a fated paradise. This, of course, was a gene-stealer cultist who was eventually successful in liberating the slave populace, converting the ruinous masses into the first servants of the choir of the void. The cultists, however, were still touched by the darkness of the Immaterium, yet as they made their pilgrimage to Xaiophoria within the Tiamet system, this taint was washed away and banished from their minds. Those now sworn to the choir then spread out through the galaxy, making contact with more established cults to incite them into making similar pilgrimages towards Xaiophoria, with the ultimate ambition of converting all others towards the mysterious goals of Tiamet. Close by to this star system, there lies a watch fortress of the Xenos-hunting Death Watch, named as Holtmote. After Vilnus, the watch commander, noted an alarming increase in the amount of void crafts being lost around Tiamet, he dispatched a kill team, coined as Gunheim, to investigate the mysterious system. The veteran Marines quickly set out and landed upon Xaiophoria, though they too were ignorant to the dangers of this world. Trudging through deep, unnervingly warm swamps, they finally emerged from the dark oppression of the jungle, only to find themselves standing upon the same horrifying grounds as the Eldari who came long before. The team quickly realized that they were woefully unprepared, and that they could do little but watch, as the great encephalic mass began to quiver, before it once again released a seismic quake of psychic energy, crashing out towards them as though it were a tsunami. The team's librarian died almost instantly, his eyes rolling back and bursting within their sockets, as his brain leaked out from his skull, utterly incapable of having borne the immense weight of the hive mind's pulse. The surviving brothers, buffeted by the psychic storm, were quickly set upon by tides of the ravenous tyrannids, charging out from the tangle, surrounding them in a seemingly impenetrable shield of chitinous plate. Fighting to the last, the members of the kill team were swallowed up and devoured by the gnashing tide, though in his final moments, Sergeant Gunheim was able to send a Vox transmission back to his craft, warning them to flee, for this world belonged to the Tyrannids. His report was later received by Watch Commander Vilnus, at around the same time that the estranged and outcasted Inquisitor Cryptman had unexpectedly arrived within their fortress. This man stood as one of the most esteemed of Inquisitors from the Ordo Xenos, as he was the first person to alert the wider Imperium of the true threat which the Tyranids posed to the stars. He had named the Tyranid species after uncovering the dead world of Tiran, and rather controversially, had always insisted on slowing the Tyranids down by ordering for the exterminatus of hundreds of innocent worlds if caught in the oncoming path of the Hive. Cryptman and Vilnus quickly met to discuss the prior events within the Tiamet system, and to contemplate on the potential purpose behind the Tyranid megastructure slowly growing upon Xaiophoria. It is said that the infamous Inquisitor has remained within the fortress for many years, and that it is from his study of Tiamet which will allow him to develop his final method for exterminating the Tyranids from our galaxy once and for all. As it so stands today, Hive Fleet Tiamet is a true enigma within the Tyranid species, and yet it is undeniably one of the most fascinating of hives which we have thus far encountered. The wilderness around their home system now strikes fear into the hearts of the void-faring sailors of our galaxy, who know not of the horrors which lurk there, but understand that their ships will almost certainly be destroyed if they attempt to delve into that lightless abyss. With Tiamet acting as a locus point to so many gene-stealer cults, the Hive has likely spelled the deaths of hundreds, if not thousands of worlds without ever having to send its own fleets to carry out the grim task, thus preserving its precious stores of biomass. Similarly, the cultists will constantly attract new, unsuspecting members to venture out towards the Tiamet system, a journey from which they will surely never return. All of the biomass appears to be funneled directly towards the unfathomable horror stretched across their world of Xyophoria, but I do not believe we shall ever know of its true function. We are left to speculate on its purpose, of being perhaps a beacon to attract the extragalactic hordes of fellow Tyranid fleets, which, if true, will certainly lead to the ultimate consumption of all life. Before we leave, there is a final horrifying theory which reads that the pulsating flesh upon Xyophoria might not be destined to remain as a stationary object, and that perhaps it will one day grow into a colossal bioform, the likes of which the galaxy has never seen. This beast, the size of a continent, would surely possess a truly unfathomable level of power, and we can only hope that this eventuality never comes to pass. But with this, my dearest friends, we have now come to our end. Thank you all for listening to this investigation on the Hive fleet of Tiamet in its entirety. And as I go, know that I will wish each and every one of you with a very warm goodbye.